Well, good morning, everybody, again. That was pathetic. Good morning. Thanks. That was much, much better. My name is Joe Holodorman. I'm the lead pastor. So glad you are here today, whether you are here, eyeball to eyeball, or whether you are there, my eyes to your screen. And for those of you joining us online, we do want to say a special welcome to you. We never leave you out. We know you're there. We thank you for allowing us to be part of your journey, wherever you find yourself, in taking one more step towards Jesus. And for those of you joining us online, we do want to give you a special warning that while today's message is safe for work, it might not be safe for your youngest viewers. We've kind of labeled this one PG-13, so parents watching online, you might want to preview this one first before deciding if this is something you want your little one to hear from us first. Our attitude is we partner with parents. It's not our choice what they hear first, it's yours. So maybe you want to preview this and let them watch later, and that would be perfectly fine for us. But either way, thank you for joining us there, and thank you for joining us here. And by way of setting up really the whole series that we're in, I want to talk a little bit about temptation. Temptation. Imagine living with a target on your back. Imagine knowing that danger is around the next corner, the next step. That whatever you're about to get into might just be your last step. But you don't quite know when that's going to happen. You just know that it's going to happen. It's like knowing you have an enemy, but you don't know when your enemy is going to show up, and you live paranoid because of it. I mean, you would just be so afraid because you don't know when they're going to show up. You don't know when you're finally going to be attacked by this thing, this object, this disaster waiting for you. That's kind of how temptation is. It's always there. It's always waiting around the next corner for us. It's lurking in the shadows, waiting for us to step into it. We even read about this in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 13, where disciples of Jesus are warned about it. When the Apostle Paul says, "Finally be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes," notice he didn't say if. He said when the day of evil comes, "you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand." So there is a target on our back, and it's called temptation, and it's lurking. It's outside of us, and we're going to step into it sooner or later. But there's also a bigger problem, or at least equal to this one, and that is our own sinful nature, what's happening inside of us. We crave the very thing being put out there in front of us. We desire those things. Our own sinful nature works against us, and in a sense works in concert with temptation. The Apostle Paul struggles with this in the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 7. Where he's fighting this and he's working this out in print. And he says this in verses 23 and 24. "But I see another law at work in me," he writes, "waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death?" I mean, it is an all-out war. That's the language he's describing. That there's this struggle inside of us fighting against what we're trying to do in the Lord, and then there's temptation waiting for us right around the next corner, or maybe not. Maybe it's around the next corner. And so we're constantly battling between what's inside of us and what's outside of us. And the war is really for the very nature of our witness and the nature of our souls and who we're going to be. Are we going to look more like Jesus, or are we going to look more like the people we used to be or the people around us? So as we start this new message series, Flirting with Disaster, that was the idea behind it, that we're struggling on the inside and then we have the struggle on the outside. And today we're starting with probably the one that we played down the most. And yet it probably has wrecked more relationships than the next two we're going to talk about combined, and that's this disaster of lust. Lust, wanting that isn't mine, desiring something that isn't mine to desire, but I want it anyway. It's already in me, the sinful nature is there, and yet the temptation's also there. And y'all, the temptation is everywhere. It's at the beach. It's at the mall. It's on TV. It's in movies. It's on my smartphone. It's on social media. It's on YouTube. It's on ads. It's on billboards. It's virtually everywhere. Temptation is all over the place in this area. It just constantly bombards us. And lest we forget, we're wired to want it. We want the very temptation coming after us. God designed us to desire, which, quite honestly, makes us a pretty easy target because we want it anyway. We're going to get into that in a few minutes. That desire in and of itself is how God wired us. But what it's done to us as a society is frightening. People have extramarital affairs because of lust. People get involved in pornography because of lust. People get involved in premarital sex because of lust. Why do we do these things? Because we fight the temptation outside and we fight the struggle of sin inside of us. Pornography has gotten so dangerous it has rewired how we even view it in culture. See, pornography used to be defined in our culture as nudity presented in a sexual nature. That's the 1950s definition. Today, the definition is similar. It's sexually graphic images or video without artistic context or purpose. Did you hear the difference? So long as you have artistic purpose, you can do anything you want, and it's not pornography by definition, which means they can slip it into shows we watch. They can stick it into movies, and if it has artistic purpose, it's not pornography by definition. And yet, the good old US of A remains the primary distributor of pornography for the world, producing a multi-billion-dollar industry. Most Americans view it right here. Used to be on TV, used to be in magazines, used to be all over movie screens. Now, it's right here thanks to private modes, thanks to non-traceable routing and various VPNs you can do. It's amazing. And then strangely enough, we give these to our children without any safeguards on them. And then we wonder why children as young as 9, if they're boys, are exposed to pornography already, and girls as young as 11 or 12 are already seeing pornography because of this. But society kind of looks at that and goes, that's the human body. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't be ashamed. That's how God made us. God made us to do these things. Oh, unless we go too far, we want to try to blame the men for this. Say it's all men, right? After all, we get told men are visual, women are emotional. That's a lie. We're all visual. 40% of pornography in the United States is consumed by women. 62% of born-again Christian women view pornography every 2 weeks. Now, the numbers are higher for men, but I'm simply making the point to say this isn't just a problem for the brothers. You see, and the reason I want to bring that up is not to beat up on the ladies. If you know me for 5 minutes, you know that's not my heart. My heart is this. If you're a lady and you're struggling with this, you not only feel the shame of the sin, you also feel like something's broken in you because it's a man's problem and you have the... Ladies, it's not just a male problem, it's a human problem. We're an easy target, and it's all over us. Now, women may lust differently than men, but the quality of that lust might be different. Men, it may just be straight visual. For women, it can be much more subtle. You ladies are wonderfully subtle. But we can still lust, and it's just as damaging for us. It's gotten so bad in society, and our whole issue with lust in our society has gotten so bad that even movie ratings are a joke. PG, which used to be relatively safe, they can show nudity in PG so long as it's brief and is not sexualized in nature, whatever that means. I'm a guy. Nudity is nudity. I don't know quite what that means. Now, PG-13, which is supposed to be the next one up, that is an abyss. They can throw anything in PG-13 because the primary audience of PG-13 movies are teenagers, 13 to 18. They can't get into R, but they can get into PG-13, and they can show a lot of sexually graphic material. They can show nudity. They can show full frontal nudity so long as they don't actually show actual sex acts for more than just a few seconds. A few seconds. PG-13. Rated R is kind of everything else. They shove everything in there. They don't know what else to do with it. Because most movie makers know that if they do R, they're targeting mostly young adults between 18 and like 25. That's most of the audience there. Unless it's war movies, then they're targeting people like me. But then those are rated R because of violence, which is its own problem. But then you have this last rating. You don't hear it very much, but it's NC-17. And that was a way for movie theaters to come up with something that was past R, but not quite X. It doesn't just mean pornographic. It can be extreme violence or extreme things that are very psychologically traumatizing. Why you'd watch that, I don't know, but it exists. But the difference between a movie that is rated NC-17 because of sexual content and rated R, one movie in particular needed to get their rating out of NC-17 into R so they could get airplay in movie theaters. So they simply removed 2 seconds of footage, roughly 48 frames, 2 seconds, and they got it back into R, and therefore they could do national movie release. The movie was still basically everybody's naked on a screen for an hour and a half, but they removed 2 seconds and made the MPAA happy. Lust. Why do they make those movies? Because we're buying it. We're going, we're watching the shows supported by the advertisers. You say, Joey, being awfully prudish. You're not the guy that deals with y'all when you come into my office and you've wrecked your lives. And it comes back to this. You go places you swear you'd never go. You get involved in relationships you'd swear you'd never do because you downplayed it so much. And you said, it'll never get me, like a good addict, it'll never get me. I can quit whenever I want. And the next thing you know, the disaster has found you. And yet, we do not have to be victimized by this. We can know that our enemy cheats. He fights hard and he fights very unfairly. He attacks something God has created and that God has made, and he perverts it and he twists it, and then he presents us this twisted, messed up version of it, and then we rewire a few generations with it. It's to the point that we create a world that doesn't even exist anymore. What I mean is, because we're exposing ourselves to sexual imagery so young, we're rewiring what young men and young women expect in relationships. And we're showing them a picture that isn't real. And I'm telling y'all, when you think it up here and you think, well, that's not real, I know that in my head, everything else in you says, that's what I want. And so we crave more and more and more. But today is the day that we're going to discover there's a solution for this. And there's a beautiful solution for this. And there's a way that God crafted this to work, that we can find deliverance from this. It's not going to be easy. Because after all, sin is fun. We want to sin. That's what Paul said. This desire in me, I want to sin. If sin wasn't fun, we wouldn't do it. I promise you, you wouldn't do it if sinning wasn't fun. But the difference is the new nature and who we are in Jesus no longer craves those things. And that nature can sometimes get overshadowed by those desires because we don't stop them early enough. So today, as we look at James chapter 1, verses 13 through 15, we're going to start looking at that source of hope to avoid this disaster, admitting it's out there, but finding the answer for it. Because there is an answer. We're not victims of this problem, although we have been victimized by it. We can find victory over it. James chapter 1, 13 through 15, it's page 825 in the Pew Bible there in front of you. James chapter 1, 13 through 25, words will be on the screen. You can look it up electronically. You can look it up at page 825 in this Bible. And hey, if you don't have a print Bible of your own and you want one, please keep this. Consider it a gift. Now, if you do have one of your own, please don't steal our Bibles, because we need to give them to people when they don't have one. So don't be a thief. That's not a disaster we're talking about, but please don't steal. But if you would like one, please, by all means, take that as our gift. We want to put the Word of God in your hand. Here's what James writes in James chapter 1, verses 13 through 15. When tempted, again, he didn't say if. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. Now, right at the beginning of verse 13, we see that the Lord does not take what's good and tempt us with it. He made sex. Did the pastor just say that? He did make it. Genesis 3, he made that. Genesis 2, sorry, or technically 1 and 2. He made Adam, he made Eve, he put them together, they had babies. What do you think happened? Come on, he made this. He said it was good. There's a whole book of the Bible that is devoted to sex between a husband and wife. It is the Song of Solomon. So when y'all get to that point you read through the Bible, I'm sorry, I become a little kid. Because some of y'all come to me and you're like, I don't know if I should be reading that. Like, this is pretty X-rated stuff. And it's like, yeah, God is not down on sex. He is not. What he's done is he's designed it like a train. Sex is like a train that runs on the rail of a husband and a wife. That's how he designed it. And he said that's a good thing. And he doesn't tempt us with that thing. What happens is we're tempted with the twisted version of that. We're tempted with that, so when we come along, we want to say, well, God is tempting me because God made it after all, right? As Christians, we tend to baptize everything. So we go, well, God made it, so God's the one that's tempting me, right? Now, we may not use that word directly. Most of us won't say, well, the devil made me do it. We usually won't say that. And we may not directly, we may know enough theologically to be able to go, well, we can't say, well, God is making me lust after this person. We're smarter than that. What we'll say is, if we're men, we might say, it's not my fault her legs go right up to her backside. In other words, whose fault is it? The Lord made her look that way. Or if you're a lady, you might say, it's not my fault he looks stellar in a suit. It's not my fault that because of his position of power, he exudes such confidence. I can't help that I'm attracted to him. Look at him. I didn't do that. See, those are issues in the realm of sovereignty. Things I didn't control, things they didn't control, things God has done. And now I'm blaming God for my lust over them. You see how we do that? This is what Paul is saying. My sin nature does these things. It shouldn't do that, but it does do that. Now I start justifying my behavior. I start justifying how I feel. And yet on the whole time I'm blaming God for doing something that he's never doing. Because he's not the one tempting us. We do that. So that's the next part of this, that he doesn't take what's good and tempts us. Instead, temptation is this combination of external and internal forces. There is something going on outside of us, the temptation, the target on our back, but there's also the inside of us that craves those things. Verse 14, James writes, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. In other words, we're easy targets. I mean, we're sitting ducks. We're asking for this to happen. If we're living in denial about it. We're practically seeking it out. If we don't have safeguards in our lives, if we're not guarding our eyes and not guarding our minds, then we're going to stumble right into this and go, gee, how'd that happen? Because it is a combination of both. There are things out there, and y'all, you cannot control what's out there. You cannot change another human being's behavior. You cannot make them do something else to stop tempting you. It's already inside of you. And so when they do whatever thing they do, the external factor that you can't control, now the internal factor takes over, and now you jump headfirst into it. Now, whose fault was it really? Now, this is a theological tangent that I have to take for just a couple of minutes. You're going to talk about this more in your small groups this week, but this word temptation is interesting because most technically, theologically, temptation is not a sin. Jesus was tempted. Scripture tells us he was tempted in all ways. That means he was even tempted with lust. But he didn't sin. So he didn't give in to that. He didn't have that internal force that drove him headfirst into it. He resisted. He pushed back on all of it. The complicating factor is we ain't him. We're not Jesus. Every English teacher just cringed. I know, but it works. But we're not Jesus. We have the Spirit of the living God living in us. Yes. We should desire those things that honor God. Yes, that's my point. But that old nature is still there. We talked about it last week, that power of habit. That old person we used to be, our BC, our before Christ person, they're still there. And for that person, the person that's not completely sanctified yet, the person that's not completely cleaned up yet, for that person that you and I have living in us too, that struggles, for that person, the line between temptation and sin is pretty blurry. I'm not saying it's blurry in the mind of God. It's not. It's blurry in our lives. Because for us, the temptation and then the sin happen almost simultaneously. It is very hard. I wish there was like a 20-minute gap between every temptation to where I had like a timer that went off and I could go, now let me think. How do I want to behave in this temptation? Do I want to do A and give in to it? Do I want to do B? And that's not how it works, is it? It is like temptation, sin, and it's like, oh, I had half a second to decide, and I chose poorly. Because that's the sin nature in us. That's part of the problem. It's both, and we walk around practically asking for it, jumping into it head first. And see, the issue is we're so busy minimizing it and downplaying it and saying, oh, it's not a big deal, that we forget that wallowing in sin is slowly killing us. As disciples of Jesus, wallowing in sin is killing us. It's poisonous to our souls. It is not how Jesus designed us to live, but it is how we choose to live. Verse 15 of our text, James writes, then after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Now that sequence is important. There's desire, it's conceived, then that desire gives birth to sin, and then sin grows up, and when it's all grown up, what does it do? It brings death. Now, for us as disciples of Jesus, we don't lose our salvation. We don't become dead again in sin. What happens is it's a poison we drink, and it puts static on the line between us and God, and puts static on the line between us and our spouse, and even puts static on the line between us and our children, us and our other relationships. It messes up everything. Sin does that. It just destroys everything it touches. And when we put this particular sin in all those relationships, it messes it up too. It is slowly killing us. It is warping us. It is changing us. It is desensitizing us. It is shifting our perception of what we find attractive and what we find repulsive. I want you to think back to maybe your grandparents. How would your grandparents respond to some of the ads in shows? How would your grandparents respond to some profile pictures on social media? How would your grandparents respond to some of the imagery that we see on a daily that is we're so used to? How would they respond? See, sometimes we're so close to the subject we don't see it, but when we go up a couple of generations, then we go, whew, they'd be shocked. Why aren't we? Because we're wallowing in it, and it's killing us. It's desensitizing us. It's ruining us, and we're the ones entertaining it. Brothers and sisters, this ought not be. This isn't how it has to be. Again, lust claims as mine what is not mine. But we can actually stop that steal. We can stop claiming stuff that isn't ours. We can stop. We are capable of doing this by the power of Jesus in us. We can. But lust is claiming as mine what isn't mine, which brings up another theological tangent. This one you're not going to talk about in your small groups this week. And that's the question of, can you lust after your spouse? And biblically the answer is no. Because your spouse is yours. You can't lust after what's already yours. Lust is claiming as mine what is not mine. The Bible says when you're married, you become one flesh, one person, essentially. Oh, forgive how quickly I'm giving this definition. What that means is that Scripture tells us that then husbands, your wife's body belongs to you. Wives, your husband's body belongs to you. You can't lust after what's already yours. By the same token, you actually can't be jealous for your spouse either. Why? They're yours. You can't be jealous for what's already yours. The problem is we go outside of that because of lust, and now we make them jealous. We make them feel jealousy. But they're not wrong to feel that way. They're claiming what is theirs. Lust is claiming what is not mine and claiming it as mine and consuming it and ingesting that and swallowing that, letting that sin become a part of me. But it doesn't have to stay that way. We can stop that. We can break that. We can cut that off at the head, and we can deal with this now. And the best way that's going to be done is accountability. Oh, what a hard word. That's a tough one. Accountability. Way back in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes chapter 4, we find an example of how accountability works. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12 teaches, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Lust claims as mine what is not mine, but we can stop the steal. which means, and here's the good news, we can avoid the disaster. We can actually avoid it. Now, I can't change the external issues. That's behavior of someone else. I can't change that. I can change me. Through the power of Jesus, I can do something about me. One of the first lessons I was ever taught on this very issue, I was taught by my grandfather, and that was train your eyes. My grandfather said this. My papa would say, son, the first look is biology. The second look's a choice. Amazing how wise that man was. The first look is just simply noticing. That's a statement of fact. Oh, she's attractive. Oh, he's attractive. How long you linger there is entirely up to you. If you undress them up and down and you're checking them out top to bottom, trying to, almost driving off the road, checking out the jogger, that's your choice. That is an option. You are training yourself to do that. But instead of you look and you look away. A friend of mine once said, bouncing your eyes. Teach your eyes simply to bounce off where you're looking. Train your eyes. You see, I have this weird thing in my life called marriage. And I want my wife to know I only have eyes for her. You know how demoralizing it is if your wife or your girlfriend sees you checking out another woman? You know how that makes her feel? You know how unattractive and small you make her feel when you notice that woman walking by and you keep watching? Makes her feel horrible and ugly and small. Ladies, you know how it makes your man feel? When you check that guy out, oh yeah, he's buff, he's cut, he doesn't have a kegger, he's got a six-pack. You know how it makes him feel whenever that man looks great in a suit and your guy barely can put one on? Makes him feel pretty small, makes him feel really emasculated, and he's not going to try very hard. We've got to train our eyes because if nothing else, our spouse or future spouse is watching. See, I also have children. My son notices things. He's 9. He sees things. He's a boy. My daughter will notice things. We have these conversations sometimes with the two of them. My son one time put me in a great spot theologically. It was wonderful. Oh, man. He noticed a gal wearing something at Target one time, and he said it way too loud. Daddy, why is she wearing that? Shut. Oh, I was just like, I was dying. I'm like, I'm going to go hide behind that. Because I know she heard him. She had, mask and all. That was back when we were all masked up. She had to have heard him. She didn't look at us, thank you, Lord. But I was like, I'm looking, I was like, son, ask me as soon as she's off the aisle. Just shh. But I mean, I had to go through that with him and say, you know, here's why, here's how we train her. I can't change external things. I can train him, though. I can show him how to train your eyes, because you know what? He's watching mine. You know what? My daughter's watching mine, too. And when some 800-pound gorilla comes to my door and tries to marry my daughter, I'll be cleaning my guns that day, too, wearing overalls and no shirt. Get that picture in your head. If you have a son, you want to date my daughter, that's the picture you put in your head. I want my daughter to see my eyes and see what I'm looking at and not looking at. Because she's learning how a man behaves from me. The stakes are high, fellas. The stakes are high, ladies. People are watching. Train your eyes. The second, don't cross intimate lines with members of the opposite sex. For crying out loud, if I could beg you to do any one thing, stop this. Do you know? You don't know. So let me say it this way. If I had $5 for everybody that came in my office over the past several years saying they had an affair and it started with texting, I wouldn't have to pay for this thing for 4 months. Why? Well, because at first the text is innocent. Then it crosses some line in there. Now I'm not so innocent. Now I'm kind of flirting. But, you know, it's okay because I'm not actually doing anything, right? I'm just flirting. Now, I'm not going to let my wife see that, will I? Now, I won't put my thumbprint on that thing, only my thumb. Well, then flirting goes a little further. Why? Because that's just what lust does. It's a drug. It goes a little further. So now I send something a little, I test the waters. Or maybe the other person tests the waters with me. And next thing you know, now we're sexting. Now we're sending pictures. Now we're fantasizing. But I still haven't actually done anything, right? Until that text turns into, let's meet up at this certain location. And then you walk into my office and go, I don't know why I did that. I know why you did that. Are you dumb or not paying attention? Don't cross intimate lines. I would rather the ladies in our office think I am aloof rather than a flirt. And you can ask them. There are times I'll be like, that's funny. I'd rather them think I am aloof than a flirt. Now, that's my line. Why do I do that? I don't want to cross intimate lines. And when we get to the point that we're crossing those lines, men and women, we need to get to the point that we think like the old Lost in Space show. We need to hear danger, Will Robinson, and we need to back away from that. For some of you, it means you need to stop texting. For some of you, it means you need to use apps that are traceable. Stop trying to use these private ones that burns the results once you send it. Because why would you need to? Your spouse doesn't have access to that? Mine does. My spouse sees everything I do. Makes her really happy. Happy wife, happy life. I'm good. But don't cross intimate lines. Don't do that, because you're going to be talking to a fellow like me and you're going to go, I don't know what happened. Run. Run from this. Be very careful before you cross those lines. Because listen, God made desire. God made us to want each other. God made us that way, because if He didn't make us that way, we wouldn't want to have sex, which means the human race would basically end after a generation. God made it this way, but we've got to be careful. Man, we've got to be careful. Quit fooling yourself. You've got to be careful. The final thing that I do, that I put into place, that I recommend to you, is to safeguard your eyes digitally. And this is my commercial for Covenant Eyes. Now, for the record, I get nothing from Covenant Eyes. I don't get a kickback from them. I'm someone who uses them. I'm a customer of theirs. I pay. They don't pay me to say anything. But Covenant Eyes is a Christian organization that you download an app. For those of you who are techie, Technobabble, it's a virtual private network. So all your network traffic runs through their servers. And because of that, they can do filtration. They can also do screen accountability. This is one of the coolest things. It takes these random screenshots and will send it to your accountability partner. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe that's a buddy, maybe it's someone of the same sex you are. Again, don't cross lines. Don't make your accountability partner someone who's the opposite sex, because you know what I call an accountability partner who's a member of the opposite sex? I call them the person you're having an affair with, because that's where it always ends, because you're getting intimate with them. Same gender, okay? They look at that, and then they can see, and they can verify nothing's going on. It keeps you on it. And I tell you, one of the guys who uses Covenant Eyes, several of us already do, he said, it actually makes me much more aware of when something does pop on the screen. I'm much quicker to flip past it, because it trains you in that sense. It just makes you aware of, enough. Now, I use Covenant Eyes. Is that because I'm a raging porn addict? No. I use it so that I never become one. I want my wife to know I only have eyes for her. I want my son to learn the proper use of desire in his marriage. I want my daughter to learn that. I don't want people to be seen as objects, and I don't want to teach my family to view people as objects. This is still the primary way we look at pornography in the United States. That's why I have Covenant Eyes. So what we did is we put a QR code on the screen. We also put it there in your message notes, because what I want to do is I want everyone to at least scan it. I'm going to tell you why before I walk you through it. Because there are some people this morning that they desperately need this. They are teetering on the edge of disaster, and they need this. This is going to be a lifeline. Then there's some that's going to be like me, and you're going to say it's an ounce of prevention. Trust me, it is worth 100 pounds a cure. And for you, awesome. Then there's going to be some that's going to go, whatever. Okay, I'm not judging you. I'm just saying that's fine. But then for those who desperately need it, they may not have the courage to do it unless they feel kind of everybody's doing it. And we don't want people to struggle with something in the shadows. My attitude is kind of enough of that. Let's just help them out and get them over the finish line. So the QR code's at the bottom of your message notes. It's also there. The one on the stage probably scans a little bit better because you're closer to it. If you're watching online, that's the only one you can really see unless you downloaded the digital notes. It'll scan just fine, actually, through a TV or your device, whatever you're watching on. But get your phone out, whether it's iPhone or Android, still works. Open your camera app. Some of you are going to learn today how to scan a QR code. I'm going to teach you something brand new. All right, open your camera app. So here's mine. My camera app's open. You're looking at me, I guess, right now. And then get your camera app and just point it at the QR code, either on the page or on the screen. I'll try not to get right in front of it. And then your phone's going to ask you if you want to open your browser, whatever that is. For me, it's one that does not pay me to give them a commercial, so it is one. And it brings that up, and it'll bring you to the Covenant Eyes sign-up page. You can create your username, create your password. You can sign up for a trial, and it's good actually for like a whole household. So like for my family, it's on my phone, it's on my wife's phone, and it's one fee. It's like a family fee. Okay, so the church gets nothing. There's no kickback for the church if you do this. I get no kickback if you do it. But it might just save your marriage. And it might just safeguard your eyes. It might train you to stop looking at things you ought not be looking at. And it can build some accountability for you. At first, maybe you want to use a spouse as your accountability. Maybe you want to use your best friend, as long as they're the same gender you are. If you're single, I would still recommend doing it. It might be a little pricey for a single person. Maybe you can share it with some friends, but just don't tell Covenant Eyes I told you to do that. Because I think that's against their license agreement, but you view that for yourself and decide what's legal and not legal. But I just so recommend this because, again, it's about guarding your eyes. It's guarding your eyes digitally because that is where most of us tend to have problems, is digital issues and digital lust. Because lust claims as mine what is not mine. It steals something from other people and then consumes it as if they were a commodity. But we can stop that steal. We can stop that. We can stop the cycle, create a new habit. Not easy, no, but by the power of Jesus we can. And then we can find victory as we experience grace and forgiveness and mercy over this disaster of lust.